invading Taiwan would be it's a tough thing. Taiwan is an island the size of Maryland. It's mountainous in the west. It's densely populated in massive urban areas in the east. There are only a couple of good landing places. There are only a couple of months when the seas are amenable to a cross-strait invasion. It's about 150 miles across. Now, if they're looking at a full invasion and subjugation of Taiwan, it's not clear to me that they could pull it off. It'd be a rude awakening for them that is analogous to the rude awakening that the Russians had with the reinvasion of Ukraine.
Before we start today's conversation, just one housekeeping note. In our next episode, we have Tyler Cowen coming on the podcast, who's the host of one of my favorite podcasts called Conversations with Tyler. He also runs Marginal Revolution, which if you do not read Marginal Revolution, the economics blog, you must. I highly recommend it. He's done a bunch of other things. He's one of the greatest teachers I know on everything from markets and economics to the future of technology and now artificial intelligence. We're going to talk about a lot of topics with Tyler. If you have a question for him, please send it to dan@unlocked.fm. That's dan@unlocked.fm. Please keep your question to under 30 seconds. Just record it as a voice memo and send it in, and we will pick a couple of them to ask Tyler in our next episode. And now into today's show. General H.R. McMaster is known to be able to break down succinctly just about any military operational scenario. But it's not just military operations and strategy that he can unpack. H.R. McMaster also has a deep sense of history of military affairs, and he served at the most senior levels of government developing and implementing a national security strategy. And he's also commanded troops on the front lines in military theaters around the world. Upon graduation from West Point in 1984, H.R. served as a commissioned officer in the U.S. Army for 34 years. He retired as a lieutenant general in June of 2018. He had many posts in the military, too many to list here. We'll post them all in the show notes. But he commanded the Combined Joint Interagency Task Force in Kabul in Afghanistan from 2010 to 2012. He commanded the Third Armored Cavalry Regiment in Iraq from 2005 to 2006. That's actually where the model for the surge, what ultimately became the surge strategy in Iraq, was first tested. And it was back in the early years of the Iraq War that I first met General McMaster in Baghdad. It wasn't his first time in Iraq. He was also deployed in Operation Desert Storm from 1990 to 1991. HR holds a PhD in military history. He was an assistant professor of history at West Point. He's the author of numerous best-selling books, including Battlegrounds, The Fight to Defend the Free World, and also Dereliction of Duty, Lyndon Johnson, Robert McNamara, the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and The Lies That Led to Vietnam. Few books have had more of an influence on me and my worldview and how I think about the government and civilian-military relations than HR's Dereliction of Duty. I highly recommend it. We'll post the link to that as well in the show notes. He's also the host of Battlegrounds, which is a podcast inspired by the name of his book. It's called Battlegrounds: International Perspectives on Crucial Challenges and Opportunities. And he's a regular on Goodfellas, a podcast produced by the Hoover Institution. I highly recommend you subscribe to both of these. He teaches at Stanford University, where he's affiliated with Hoover. He also teaches at the business school at Stanford, and he's the chair of an advisory board at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies. So a lot here to learn from HR. As we return to an age of geopolitical conflict, are our business leaders and policymakers and the markets and the media undervaluing geopolitical risk, real geopolitical risk, where things could really unravel soon, not off in the distance, but 2025 or 2026? That's what we get into today with General H.R. McMaster. This is Call Me Back. And I'm pleased to welcome to this podcast my longtime friend and sort of intellectual mentor, even though he doesn't know it, retired General H.R. McMaster, former White House National Security Advisor, historian, host of one of the best podcasts I listen to on military affairs and global affairs called Battlegrounds. We'll put the link to it in the show notes. And also co-host of one of my favorite podcasts, Goodfellas. And and the author of several books, but one of which had a huge influence on my thinking. I read about a decade and a half ago, Dereliction of Duty, which we'll talk about near the end of this conversation. HR, thanks for joining us.
Hey, Dan, great to be with you. And man, this is a great podcast. Thanks so much for the service you're providing here.
Thank you. Thanks for doing this. We've had a number of offline conversations over the years, so I appreciate you willing to do one of these online. I hope you are as candid in the online as you are in the offline, but totally understand if you have to be more restrained.
You're going to be candid. That's why I was only, I think, in the White House for 13 months.
Exactly. Okay, so let's jump into it. I one thing I mentioned to you offline is I was recently having lunch with a friend of mine who has done, let's call it, a lot of geopolitical, engaged in a lot of geopolitical advisory work, one way or the other, and has the ear of a number of business leaders, and has been doing it for a number of years. And he said that he used to tell business leaders that they were overvaluing and over-interpreting geopolitical risk. That is to say, the reality is the nature of flare-ups in geopolitics, as horrendous and awful and traumatic and gut-wrenching as a terrorist attack may be in any part of the world. He argued the reality is, he would tell business leaders, it's not going to affect the macro global economy that much. It's not really going to have long-term impact on the markets. It may have short-term impact, but not long-term or even medium-term impact. And that you business leaders, the markets, are overreacting in the moment to these flare-ups. And he says what we're dealing with now, sort of, let's make the starting point the Russia-Ukraine war, which is now over a year long, but you could have maybe say it was sometime before that. Is he says what we're experiencing now, he thinks business leaders are undervaluing and underestimating the impact of and underinterpreting geopolitical events. So what's different now? If he's right, A, do you agree with him? And B, if he's right, why is the business world and why is the business world and the markets undervaluing geopolitical events now relative to pre-Russia Ukraine?
Yeah, he's right, and I think he's making the observation kind of late to the game. I mean, I think that it is clear that I think business financial leaders have undervalued geostrategic risk. I mean, going back to the turn of the century, because we had some harbingers of future armed conflict, future geostrategic competition that we just didn't pay attention to, because during the 90s we were over optimistic and we became complacent. We were over optimistic based on some good reasons, right? We'd won the Cold War, the Soviet Union collapsed. China, of course, was not yet really a clear competitor in the 1990s. That didn't really occur until the vast increases in the size of their economy through the 1990s, and especially after World Trade Organization accession in 2001. And we demonstrated our military prowess in the Gulf War. So we thought, hey, an arc of history has guaranteed the primacy of our free and open societies over closed authoritarian systems. We thought, okay, well, who's a great power to compete with us right now, right? This is what some people called it at the time our unipolar moment, but some people forgot the moment part of that and thought that we were going to have predominant power and influence into the foreseeable future. And then we thought our technological prowess, our technological military prowess would guarantee our security. And those warnings started to happen at the turn of the century, right? We had the largest mass murder terrorist attack in history on 9/11. Terrorists perpetrated that attack bypassing our technological military prowess, and of course, inflicted tremendous damage on us, murdering 3,000 Americans, but also taking trillions of dollars out of our economy, right? So, how about Vladimir Putin coming into power in the year 2000, kind of laying it out in his initial speech, but then taking a series of actions in the early 2000s, poisoning a presidential candidate in Ukraine, various assassinations, a sustained campaign of subversion, massive denial of service attacks on Estonia, invasion of Georgia, 2008. I mean, he laid it out in the speech at the Munich Security Conference, 2007. What did we do? Nothing. We were complacent. I could give many, many other examples of China's behavior that demonstrated that they were applying various forms of economic aggression against us and not playing by the rules, not becoming the so-called responsible stakeholder. I think you could say the same about Iran's nuclear program, for example. Their sustained proxy wars against us as they were complicit in the killing of 600 American servicemen and women in Iraq during the Iraq War. I mean, so I think we've just been not paying attention, Dan. And to answer your second part of the question, why? I think it's just optimism bias, confirmation bias, self deception, and I think if you see what happened to some companies with a complete rending of the economic relationship with Russia, like BP's massive losses, for example, some things in life are black swans, but hey, this was a pink flamingo. I mean, this was right in front of us for a long time.
So you talk about confirmation bias or recency bias. So you're a historian in one of your many hats. Through almost all of modern history, the West has been mired in some kind of great power conflict, whether it got cold or hot. There was some kind of great power conflict. And then from the fall of the Soviet Union until the Russia-Ukraine war, we had 30 years of no great power. What you're saying, there were signs of it, and so some commentators were late to it, and some of our government leaders were late to it. But it certainly wasn't the sort of visible, concrete form of great power conflict that had existed through the Cold War and through the First World War, and we can go on and on and on back through history. So we kind of had this 30-year, this 3-decade quasi break, not full break, but quasi break. And many of our leaders in government today in the West came of age during that time. That's when they developed their skills. That's when they developed their knowledge base. That's what they knew. And suddenly we're in this new period, what feels like a new period as it relates to the U.S. and China and the U.S. and Russia. So first of all, how would you characterize this new period, and how much of a problem is it that our leaders have no real experience with this kind of environment?
It's a big problem. It's a big problem because we have two revisionist powers on the Eurasian landmass who are determined to rewrite the rules of international discourse. Economically, from a security perspective, I would define human rights, for example, and are promoting their authoritarian, in the case of China, mercantilist model in a way that would be to our profound disadvantage if they're able to succeed. And so the stakes are quite high. But what's happened is, and as you suggested, Dan, is that our complacency has led to a couple of things. First of all, it's led to, I think, a lack of strategic competence. Our skills in competition have atrophied. In fact, we became so complacent in the 90s and in the 2000s that we vacated key arenas of competition that are critical to our future, to future prosperity and preserving peace and security. And that those are economic arenas of competition, for example, but also even physical arenas of competition. The South China Sea, for example, where China laid claim to the ocean. And so I think that we are behind. And I think it's sort of as a result of this over-optimism and maybe soft-headed cosmopolitanism, or whatever you want to call it, in these terms like the global community and the international community, we've talked ourselves into this idea that the world operates as a condominium of nations who cooperate through international organizations to solve global issues. That's not the case. So Gary Cohn and I wrote this essay in 2017 entitled "America First Doesn't Mean America Alone." I think it was in the Wall Street Journal, and there's a subsequent, I think, in the Times along the same theme, in which we said, hey, we have to compete. Competition doesn't mean confrontation, but it means that we have to re-enter some of these arenas of competition. For example, when you think of an organization like the World Health Organization, why would that be controversial? Should we work together on global health? Well, I mean, China actively subverted that organization, like it did the Human Rights Council. So I think we have to recognize, the need to compete and the need for us to get some of our muscle memory back to do it, because our muscles are atrophied. And I think what's even worse, the second factor is that overconfidence, of course, maybe a touch of hubris, in the 90s led to some profound disappointments, right? It led to a disappointment associated with the horrible terrorist attacks in 9/11. But how about the disappointment of the unanticipated length and difficulty of the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan? Dan, I think we first met in Baghdad, 2003, like right
Yep.
after Baghdad fell, and what I think we ought to talk more about is not whether or not we should have invaded Iraq in 2003, but who the heck thought it would be easy? Because remember, a lot of people thought it would be easy, and so we were flying too high in the 90s. Then we flew too low, as a financial crisis hit, as we had an opioid epidemic, as we saw social media increase the vitriol of our partisan discourse and polarize us, and we saw identity politics and new forms of reified philosophies and critical theories and postmodernist theories interact with old forms of bigotry and racism and draw strength from one another, right? Create centripetal forces that are spinning us apart. I mean, so so we went from being too high to too low, and now we have to regain not only our competence but also our confidence. Our confidence in who we are as a people, our confidence in our democratic institutions and processes and our principles, but also our confidence that we can develop and implement a competent approach to foreign policy and national security.
Okay, so I want to get back to that in terms of what it would look like in a moment. But before we do, you say that there was, we spent a lot of time debating whether or not we should have gone into Iraq in 2003 and not enough looking at why we thought it would be so easy. I tend to agree with you. Today, there seems to be, and you and I have talked about this, it's the only topic on which there's a real bipartisan consensus, which was confronting China in some way. And the only two issues where you can find bipartisan consensus today in Washington is on confronting China and reining in big tech. And on big tech, there may be a bipartisan consensus that big tech needs to be reined in, but each party has a different concern about big tech, and therefore it makes a sort of remedy for dealing with big tech, at least reached in a bipartisan sense, difficult to imagine. But that's not necessarily the case with China. I was struck by that first hearing, the congressional hearing, Mike Gallagher's committee on China about a month ago. And basically the Democrats and the Republicans, and there was that TikTok hearing also, I think that was maybe in the Commerce Committee in the House. The Democrats and Republicans, basically, it's the only time in a long time I've seen Republicans and Democrats on Capitol Hill, basically, they could have been interchangeable in terms of the toughness they were talking. So there's a consensus on confronting China in some way. Do you worry that, like the consensus before the Iraq War about how easy it would be, which was also a bipartisan consensus, A, we need to go into Iraq, and B, the sense that it would be easy, do you worry that there's not enough internal discussion about what confronting China will look like, and are we kind of, tiptoeing into a military confrontation, a head-on military confrontation that we're not fully imagining the risks around, and will regret, like, well, why weren't we having a more robust internal conversation before we let things escalate to this degree?
Yeah, I think the reason why we didn't have an earlier discussion about this is complacency. I mean, in March of 2017, we were rushing to get a sort of conceptual foundation in place for a new U.S. policy toward China, because Xi Jinping, as you might remember, was visiting Mar-a-Lago in the first week of April. So we convened the Principals Committee of the National Security Council, and I read an excerpt of the Obama administration policy toward China, and observed that we were about to effect the most significant shift in U.S. foreign policy since the end of the Cold War. And that's because the Obama administration's policy, and actually the policies of previous administrations, going even back to George H.W. Bush, in the post-Cold War period, were based on the fundamental assumption that China, after being welcomed into the international community economically, diplomatically, and so forth, would play by the rules. And as China prospered, that it would liberalize its economy and liberalize its form of governance. It was, by 2017, clear that that was not the case. It was clear based on Chinese actions and behaviors, and that required us to take an approach and the shift that we took is toward transparent competition. And And so I think that, the reason we didn't do that sooner is because we clung to that fundamentally flawed assumption for far, far too long. And I think for those, who would say, hey, isn't this dangerous, this consensus? No, I think it's just way overdue. I'll tell you, it was not the consensus in 2017, Dad. I'll tell you, when we rolled out the policy and we talked about the policy, there was a tremendous amount of pushback from those who continued to cling to that fundamentally flawed assumption. And then I think what China's done is China's really helped create the consensus themselves. I mean, if you want to thank anybody for the consensus on China, thank Xi Jinping. I kind of want to send him flowers and chocolates, man, and say thanks for helping everybody realize, that this is a real problem, because look at their behavior. I mean, just since COVID, how about foisting COVID on the world? How about going after anybody who tried to ring the alarm bells, persecuting journalists and doctors who were trying to do so, subverting the World Health Organization in the midst of the pandemic, adding insult to injury with this wolf warrior diplomacy, massive cyber attacks on our pharmaceutical companies and medical research activities during the pandemic. How about economic coercion during the pandemic toward Australia? You said, hey, I think we have to try to figure out where this virus came from. So they punished Australia economically. Same treatment for Estonia. I mean, look at what they did in the South China Sea, rammed and sunk vehicles during this, vessels during this period of time, bludgeoning Indian soldiers to death on the Himalayan frontier. Okay, I mean, what more do you need, in terms of evidence? We haven't even talked about the coercion toward Taiwan or the threatening sort of military actions in the Senkakus around Japan and Northeast Asia. I mean, the list just goes on, and so. How about like enabling the Russians as they have been in Ukraine? The strategic partnership with Iran, joint naval exercises with the Iranians and the Russians. I mean, let's
Right.
wake up to this, Dan. And recognize that we should stop underwriting our own demise with financial and economic relationships that strengthen the People's Liberation Army, that help them, perpetuate or perpetrate a campaign of slow genocide against the Uyghurs and stifle human freedom, or employ their statist, mercantilist economic model against us in a way that fundamentally disadvantages our businesses. So I'm not afraid of the consensus. I think it's just long overdue.
So, so maybe what you're basically saying is there was not a consensus before, and we've worked through these issues, and the threat has become so glaring that it's not like suddenly the American public, as expressed through its representatives in Washington, are on a war footing. It's that it's a delayed reaction after a lot of kind of walking around willfully blindfolded, or blindfolding ourselves, and hoping that this threat, wasn't real, and now we realize it's real, and to your point, long overdue.
And some people are struggling still. I mean, if you look at Janet Yellen's recent speech on China, I mean, it is a textbook case of cognitive dissonance, textbook. And so I think there are still some people who, are disappointed. They should be disappointed. But I think that many people are still reluctant to wake up to the new reality that we have to compete.
Our mutual friend Hal Brands co-authored a book with Michael Beckley called The Danger Zone, about what he regards as the coming hot war with China. And, he kind of lays out that this is not far out in the horizon. This is happening soon, potentially really soon. So can you just summarize his take? Do you agree with it? Like, what does it look like? Are we actually looking at a U.S.-China flare-up is a 2025 event, a 2026 event?
Yes, we are, and I think the reason we are because of the aspirations and the fears of the Chinese Communist Party, and I think there's two misunderstandings we have to correct, about the nature of the competition. One is a tendency to kind of just blame us, because we're trying to keep China down, or to say that this competition is really just part of the Thucydides trap, and a natural sort of confrontation between a rising power and a status quo power. But I think you have to, again, look squarely at the Chinese Communist Party's actions, but also read their words. I mean, the great scholar of communist China, Frank Decoder. I highly recommend his 5 volumes now on the party. He said that people tend to when they look at China to treat secondary sources as primary and primary sources as secondary. But if you look at what Xi Jinping's saying, he's preparing the Chinese people for war. He's talking about the need to make sacrifices. He's talking about the situation today and portraying it as analogous to Mao's decision to intervene in Korea, right? Which they call the War of American Aggression, and he calls it a preemptive blow that Mao delivered to prevent another 100 blows. And so, as the Chinese economy struggles, as the party, fails because of its own decisions, the frailties in the economy, based on their race to surpass us, the focus on economic growth to a fault, where they've incurred so much debt. You see this playing out in the real estate sector. I think what you're going to see is, who are they going to blame? They're going to blame us, right? And that's going to lead to, I think, a increase in jingoistic nationalist rhetoric, and it's going to lead to, I think, potentially more aggression oriented on Taiwan or in the South China Sea. And I think Xi Jinping thinks he has maybe only a fleeting window of opportunity to act before maybe China grows old, before it can grow rich, maybe act before Taiwan strengthens its defenses further. And we have some big events coming up, the Taiwanese election in February, for example, a U.S. election in 2024. And I think the danger is if they portray weakness, which leads to kind of the second misunderstanding, that what we do to compete might be seen as provocative. What's provocative? Weakness is provocative. I mean, if you look at Russia's renewed invasion of Ukraine, it followed the disastrous surrender to a terrorist organization and withdrawal from Afghanistan. And Putin looked at us, Xi Jinping looked at us being the West, the United States in particular, thought, hey, they've got nothing. In fact, they said as much in Beijing just prior to the Olympics and just prior to the reinvasion of Ukraine. They said basically, you're over, United States. You're over in the West. This is the new era of international relations. Get used to us being in charge. So I think we have to really recognize that, kind of Reagan was right. Peace through strength, and not that we want to be, beating our chests about it or anything, but we need to demonstrate real military capabilities, and we have to demonstrate real resolve to compete economically and to bolster supply chains and to ensure that we don't trade energy dependency that we had like in the Middle East in the 1970s for an energy dependency on China associated with hardware and equipment that necessary for the transition to renewable energy sources. I'm talking about solar panels and wind turbines and the upstream components and the rare earths associated with those, or battery manufacturing. We need to really do quite a bit, Dan, and we're already behind.
Frank Dakota, he's the book. The one volume I know is and read parts of is I would say Devour, but my friend John, who knows, says whenever time I say I've devoured a book, he doesn't believe me because he doesn't think I could devour that many books. So it's true. Sometimes I dip in and out of books, and that the Dakota book on famine is one of them. But it's a multi-volume. You're saying he's got many volumes.
Mao's Great Famine is that's
right.
That's the one on the one on the Great Leap Forward, right?
Right.
Then what he did is that was the first one he wrote. Then he wrote the sequel to that, which was on the Cultural Revolution. Then he wrote the prequel to both of those, which is the history of the party, going all the way up to 48, 49, really up to the Great Leap Forward. And then the last volume is the party since Mao,
Yep.
and I'm telling you,
yeah. We'll put them all in the show notes. He's a force of nature. If China tries to take Taiwan militarily, do you think there's any way the U.S. does not get involved? Is there a world in which we don't get involved, and doesn't China know that?
Well, yeah, we will be involved, right?
Right.
I mean, just look at microprocessor semiconductors. And I mean, the world goes into global depression. I mean, that's what happens if that supply chain is disrupted. Now we're in a race to try to bolster that supply chain, obviously, with factories everywhere from South Korea to Japan to Ohio to Texas to New York and so forth. But But that's going to take 5 years, as a conservative estimate. So I think the world would be involved for sure anyway, and there's a big debate now, and Dan, I don't really know what to do about this, about the strategic ambiguity policy and whether or not we should remove strategic ambiguity, which means that we don't explicitly enter into a defensive alliance with Taiwan, and it's not clear whether we're going to be where we intervene or not. And the idea with strategic ambiguity was that would be sufficient to deter the Chinese Communist Party, but also it would provide impetus, for the Taiwanese to provide for their own defense. But President Biden's kind of almost removed it. He said, he's known for making misstatements, of course, but if this is a misstatement, he's made that misstatement 3 or 4 times, right, and pretty clearly. So I think that commitment seems to have been made. Now, what does that mean in reality? What happens if there's a soft or a hard blockade of Taiwan? How do we respond? I think we do respond. I think we have tremendous capabilities, Dan. I think there has been obviously a recognition based on the war in Ukraine that we've been underinvesting in some key sectors of our defense innovation base and industrial base. And we've got to really work hard, to improve our capacity to bolster supply chains, to manufacture munitions, and to address the bow wave of deferred military modernization, to address the bow wave of already purchased weapons, $19 billion worth to Taiwan. So there's a lot of work to do, but invading Taiwan would be kind of a tough thing, and if you look at just the U.S. subsurface capability, our submarine capability, I think the People's Liberation Army would be it'd be a rude awakening for them. That is analogous to the rude awakening that the Russians had with the reinvasion of Ukraine. Taiwan is an island the size of Maryland. It's mountainous in the west. It's densely populated in massive urban areas in the east. There are only a couple of good landing places. There are only a couple of months when the seas are amenable, to a cross-strait invasion. It's about 150 miles across. Now there are other things they could do with the islands that are just a couple of miles away and so forth. But if they're looking at a full invasion and subjugation of Taiwan, it's not clear to me that they could pull it off. That the People's Liberation Army can pull it off.
Can you tell us, and then I want to move to a couple quick other topics, but can you tell us where you see the current Russia-Ukraine war, where it's heading over the next few months, particularly as we head deep into the summer?
Well, I think it's important to assess the relative strength of Russia and Ukraine based on capability and capacity. How effective their military forces can be in terms of operating with combined arms and joint capabilities, and its sufficient scale and for ample duration to accomplish the war aims. But then also to look at the will factor, the will within the fighting forces, but also the will of their national leadership and those who support that national leadership. So let's look at capability. Hey, the Russian military is spent conventionally. Their army, for sure, is spent conventionally. Not all their joint capabilities, certainly not their nuclear forces or their air forces, and not all their naval forces and so forth. But their army, I think, Dan, must be at the brink of moral collapse. You see that with some of the hodgepodge forces, the Wagner Group forces, some of their paratroop forces, and these Donetsk Republic militias around Bakhmut that are just suffering unsustainable casualties. And if you look at the overall casualties they've suffered, the term decimation comes from the idea that when a force is decimated, it takes 1/10 losses, that it loses its combat effectiveness. They're more than decimated. They can't regenerate the combat capabilities that they've lost, and so they can't win conventionally. But what they've done is they've developed very extensive defenses. And the question is, okay, now on the Ukrainian side, they have the will. Have they been able to disengage enough forces and train them adequately and provide them with the range of capabilities they need for a sustained offensive? And we're going to see that pretty soon. And I believe that if they can penetrate those defenses and turn the Russians out of the defenses along the coast, to the Sea of Azov and the Black Sea, then Ukraine becomes economically viable again, and the Ukrainian armed forces can place Russian logistics facilities and bases in Crimea in a position where they're no longer tenable. You're starting to see that now with some of the Ukrainian long-range strikes against depots, against aircraft. I mean, the Ukrainians shot down 2 aircraft over Russian territory in the last week. And so these strikes in depth are meant to prepare for the offensive. But once the offensive starts, that's when you have to combine mobile protective firepower, protected mobility, skilled infantry, fires, aviation capabilities, electromagnetic warfare, along with engineering. Okay, you're going to see combat engineering being decisive here. They're going to have to make river crossings, which the Russians have failed to do, and the Ukrainians have not yet attempted a river crossing in contact with an enemy. Multiple obstacle crossings. I mean, hey, this is not an easy military problem to conduct a sustained offensive against prepared defenses. So, hey, I don't know, Dan. My gut tells me the Ukrainians can do it because of the paucity of Russian will and the degree to which they've suffered unsustainable levels of casualties. And so the time is now to give the Ukrainians everything we can. I mean, I was so glad to see the United Kingdom, provide some of these long-range missile capabilities. It's important to defend the Ukrainians from these onslaughts that we've seen over the past week of massive missile strikes. I mean, to defend against these missiles, you have to be able to shoot down the arrows, but you also have to be able to kill the archer. And so they need these long-range capabilities for defensive purposes, as well as to disrupt the enemy's command and control and their fires capabilities in depth as they initiate this offensive.
There's a lot, HR, on the UK take on Russia, Ukraine, and the military role in your recent episode of Battlegrounds, your podcast with General Nick Carter from the UK military that I highly recommend. I wanted, just before we run out of time, I want to jump to a few of our questions. We said you were going to be on. We got a ton of them. We can't get to all of them, but there's a huge HR fan base out there. So I'm just going to try to rattle off a couple of these. Here we go.
This is Corey Gruber from Virginia. General McMaster, why is there a near wholesale lack of accountability for senior military leaders? Have they been batting 1,000 for the last 2 decades?
It's like right out of Dereliction of Duty, your book. So what's your response?
Yeah, well, of course, military leaders should be held accountable, responsible, for military operations and efforts. But as Sir Michael Howard, the great historian, has said, and I don't want to make excuses for anybody, but he said that most often, the causes of victory and defeat are found far from the battlefield. And I would say that in our most recent frustrations in Iraq, but especially in Afghanistan, those frustrations were caused, I think, by fundamentally flawed and inconsistent policies and strategies that were created in Washington. The war in Afghanistan, which is heartbreaking for me, was not a 20-year war. It was a 1-year war fought 20 times over. And I described this in the inconsistency and the fundamentally flawed nature of those strategies in the book Battlegrounds, if anybody's interested in more on it. And then not to take anything away from this awesome podcast, but I vented on Afghanistan with Barry Weiss, who asked this question to me on her Honestly podcast right after the disastrous retreat. I think from, as always you could call it, from Afghanistan in August, September of 2021. So I am sympathetic to your question. But, ultimately, as I wrote in Dereliction of Duty, a president can get the military advice, he or she wants based on the way they structure that relationship. And I think it's quite clear that across both the Trump and the Biden administrations, those two presidents prioritized withdrawal over the achievement of any kind of worthwhile outcome consistent with our interests in Afghanistan.
All right, I'm going to. It is amazing. You think about it from the perspective of many parts of the world. It's particularly the Middle East, that they've had multiple administrations from different parties focused on some kind of withdrawal from the region, and how could they talk about a bipartisan consensus? Here's another question for you.
A military question for Mr. McMaster. The West has been trying to stop the Iranian nuclear program for decades. At this late date, does Iran have any nuclear infrastructure that could be hit successfully by a military strike? I would think that after all this time, the Iranians have all of its nuclear sites buried so deep or hardened to such an extent that any military effort by the U.S. or Israel would have very little impact. In other words, is the threat of military action an empty one? My name is Joseph. Thank you for your answer.
I think it's important to recognize that any kind of a strike, a single strike, would probably be inadequate, that there would have to be a sustained campaign to block Iran's path toward a nuclear weapon that could threaten Israel with destruction. I believe that it's going to happen. I mean, if Iran doesn't enter into some kind of agreement that provides a high degree of transparency and very rigorous, verification mechanisms and inspection regime, then I think, the Begin Doctrine is alive and well in Israel, kind of across the political spectrum. So this is something to think about and to consider how something like this would happen, a strike and a series of strikes and really a sustained campaign to block Iran's path to the most destructive weapons on earth. I think it would have to include, a range of capabilities that would have to be disrupted. Not only nuclear facilities, but those involved with the program that have knowledge or where that knowledge base is stored. Of course, it's tied to Iran's missile program, as well. These aren't the only weapons of mass destruction either. That
So to be clear, it's not just for our listeners. It's not just about their nuclear capability. It's about their ability to take that nuclear capability and deliver it in the form of a weapon, which is dependent on their missile development program.
Right. And to threaten Israel with destruction. Right. And of course, what they're doing is trying to deter Israel through these capabilities, but also through their proxy forces in southern Lebanon and Gaza, and now in Syria. I mean, they've been trying to place a proxy army on the border of Israel and Syria. And so it's tied. The effort to block their path to a nuclear weapon is also tied to addressing Iran's, 4-decade-plus long proxy war they've been waging against, the United States, Israel, and their Arab neighbors. So I think what you really need is a comprehensive approach to the threats that Iran poses to international security. And we should be working together with partners and allies in the region. But of course, our idiotic policies toward the Middle East, I think, have set us back quite a bit with some of our Arab partners and allies. And we have to really, I think, work hard to regain lost ground in those relationships.
All right. We will leave it there, HR. Thanks for doing this. I said at the beginning we would talk about dereliction of duty. While we really didn't get into it, that one of those questions teed it up, and I will put that book in the show notes. I highly recommend it. It is a book I actually devoured, John. And it's really about military, what led to decision making in the Vietnam War. And anyways, it's like one of the 3 or 4 books I recommend to people interested in foreign policy and decision making in the U.S. HR, we're gonna have to have you back because we had a lot of questions that we didn't get to. But sadly, given the state of affairs in the world, they will all be relevant. They will continue to be relevant, those questions. So we'll just put them in our inventory system, and we will repurpose them when you are next on. That is a way of me securing an early commitment to have you back. Until then, thanks for coming on.
Hey, Dan, great to be with you. And when I made the transition, from uniform to Silicon Valley, I reread Startup Nation again. And so I just want to thank you for that book. It helped me understand Israel better. I went to the Museum of Innovation when I visited Tel Aviv, and your book was just a great primer for my last visit to Israel, as well as a primer for my understanding kind of the importance of an innovation ecosystem like we have here in Silicon Valley as well.
Thank you. And the reason he's saying here in Silicon Valley is because we're recording this. He's sitting at his office at the Hoover Institute in Stanford University, in case anyone is mentioning. I'm looking at you, HR. You got like a fantastic view, which is reason enough to stay there.
Santa Cruz Mountains out those windows and South Bay out the other. I'm in the literal ivory tower here at the Hoover Tower.
A little better than Fallujah. All right.
All right.
Take care. Thanks for that. Thanks for the plug for Startup Nation. I'll talk to you soon, my friend. That's our show for today. To keep up with H.R. McMaster, you can track him down at the Hoover Institution. That's hoover.org. You can also find him at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies. We'll post his books and his podcasts in the show notes. We had one technical hiccup when we recorded this episode. Choppy Wi-Fi at Stanford. I guess they're not paying their phone bills. So weren't able to get to all the questions. A couple of the questions that you had sent in fell off. We only were able to get to one of them. But when we have Tyler on, we will be sure to make up for it and get to more of your questions. So please send them in to dan@unlocked.fm. Just keep it to under 30 seconds, record it, and send it in. And some of the questions you all sent in for HR are readily usable for future guests, whether it's HR or anyone else on geopolitics. So we'll figure out a way to play a couple of those questions for future guests, because sadly, those questions and the issues raised in them are not going anywhere anytime soon. Call Me Back is produced by Ilan Benatar. Until next time, I'm your host, Dan Senor.